What would make one of gospel music's most powerful and anointed voices, Mali Music, step away from the very industry that gave him his platform? Was it betrayal from church leaders, pressure from the gospel world, or something even deeper? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of Mali Music's shocking decision to leave gospel for a season and the untold truth behind his journey that fans never saw coming. Before we dive in, let me ask you this. How does a young artist celebrated as one of the most talented voices in gospel music suddenly step away from the very industry that embraced him? Mali Music wasn't just another singer. He was seen as the future of gospel, a bridge between traditional church sounds and modern artistry. Yet, in the middle of his rising career, he shocked fans and critics alike when he walked away from gospel for a season that left many wondering if he had abandoned his faith. In this video, we're uncovering the real story behind Mali Music's decision. We'll explore the pressures he faced from the gospel industry, the battles with labels, and the personal revelations that pushed him to pursue a path outside of gospel. You'll hear about the backlash he endured, the rumors that spread, and the hidden motivations that only now are starting to come to light. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Mali Music's story isn't just about leaving gospel. It's about challenging the system, finding his true voice, and redefining what it means to be an artist of faith. And trust me, there's a twist in this story that will leave you rethinking everything you thought you knew about him. Mali Music, born Courtney Jamal Pard, didn't just stumble into gospel music. He was born into it. Raised in Savannah, Georgia, he was surrounded by church culture from an early age. His gift for music showed almost immediately. By the time most kids were just learning to play, Mali was already writing songs and playing multiple instruments. Church became his training ground, and soon his voice and musical style began to stand out. Unlike many gospel artists who stuck closely to the traditional choir and hymn-driven sound, Mali brought something different to the table. He combined R&B smoothness, hip-hop energy, and the raw emotion of gospel into one unforgettable sound. His ability to move seamlessly between worship and contemporary vibes caught people's attention quickly. By his early 20s, Mali had already built a dedicated fan base who saw him as the future of gospel music. His breakout moment came with songs like Available and I Hate You, which captured not only the hearts of churchgoers, but also music lovers outside the church walls. That crossover appeal was powerful, but also dangerous. Why? Because the gospel industry has always wrestled with artists who didn't fit neatly into their box. For many insiders, Mali was too different, too bold. But for fans, he was exactly what the next generation needed. This unique space he occupied made Mali both a rising star and a controversial figure at the same time. While some hailed him as a pioneer, others accused him of being too secular or watering down the gospel. The whispers in church circles were growing louder. Was Mali really gospel? Or was he chasing something else? But here's where it gets interesting. Because just as Mali was reaching new heights, the very industry that should have supported him began to turn into a battlefield. And the fight he faced behind the scenes would push him to make one of the most shocking decisions of his career. On the surface, Mali Music's rise looked like a dream come true. He was young, gifted, and in demand. Churches were booking him. Youth groups were singing his songs. And the gospel charts were beginning to reflect his growing influence. But what many fans didn't see was the weight of expectations crushing down on him from every direction. The gospel industry has a long history of elevating young stars quickly, then holding them to impossibly high standards. For Mali, this meant he wasn't just an artist. He was expected to be a role model, a preacher, a theologian, and a spiritual leader all at once. Every lyric he wrote, every note he sang, every interview he gave was scrutinized through the lens of, is this church enough? Behind closed doors, record label executives and industry leaders weren't making things easier. They saw Mali's crossover appeal, his ability to connect with audiences who didn't usually listen to gospel, and they wanted to capitalize on it. But at the same time, those same leaders warned him not to drift too far from the gospel sound. In other words, Mali was trapped in a no-win situation. If he stayed strictly gospel, they'd say he wasn't reaching enough people. If he experimented with new sounds, they'd say he was abandoning the faith. To make things worse, some church leaders who should have supported his creativity began openly criticizing him. Rumors started to spread. Was Mali compromising to fit into the secular world? Was he trying to leave the church behind? These questions weren't just whispered in pews. They were blasted on blogs, in interviews, and on social media. The very community that had once cheered him on now seemed divided about whether he was a hero or a traitor. And then came the business side of it. Contracts, deals, and hidden clauses made life behind the scenes even more stressful. Molly himself admitted in later interviews that the politics of the gospel industry became suffocating. The control labels tried to exert over his art, the expectations placed on his image, and the tug-of-war between gospel and mainstream. It all began to take a toll on him spiritually and emotionally. Imagine being in your 20s, carrying the weight of an entire industry's expectations on your shoulders while still trying to stay true to your personal walk with God. For Molly, this wasn't just about music anymore. It was about identity. Who was he really making music for? The church, the labels, or God himself? That question kept haunting him. By this point, his frustrations were mounting. Fans could sense the tension in his music, the rawness in his interviews. And then, in one bold move, Molly Music made a decision that shocked everyone. He stepped away from the gospel industry, leaving behind the very platform that had catapulted him to fame. But here's the shocking part they don't want you to know. Molly didn't just leave for personal peace. He left because of something deeper, something many gospel artists are afraid to admit. And once you hear it, you'll understand why his departure rattled the entire gospel world. Every artist has a moment when the pressure becomes unbearable. For Molly Music, that moment didn't arrive all at once. It was a slow build, one compromise here, one criticism there, until it reached a point where staying in gospel music felt like a betrayal of his own soul. At first, he tried to adapt. He adjusted his sound slightly. He navigated industry politics as best as he could, and he kept pushing forward. But the more he tried to please both sides, the gospel gatekeepers and the fans who wanted him to branch out, the more he realized he was losing himself. His creativity, the very thing that made him unique, was being boxed in. Behind the scenes, record label executives reportedly pressured him to create songs that were more marketable, which often translated into music that was safe, predictable, and designed to fit radio formats rather than his authentic artistry. For an artist like Molly, whose entire identity was built on pushing boundaries and blending genres, this felt suffocating. And then there were the attacks from within the church. Some pastors openly criticized him from pulpits, saying his music wasn't anointed enough. Comment sections under his performances began filling with accusations that he was turning his back on God. It didn't matter that his lyrics still carried hope, faith, and scripture references. What mattered to his critics was that he didn't fit their mold. The pain of being misunderstood by the very community that raised him began to cut deep. Imagine giving your all to inspire people only to be told that your worship wasn't good enough, that your sound was a threat to tradition. For Molly, the constant judgment created a spiritual weight heavier than any business deal or contract negotiation. The final straw came when he realized that in order to keep moving forward in gospel, he would have to silence parts of his creativity. He would have to trade authenticity for acceptance. And that, he decided, was too high a price to pay. So Molly Music made the boldest move of his career. He stepped away, not from God, not from faith, but from an industry that had tried to define him on its own terms. He later described this season as one of soul-searching, a time where he needed to rediscover why he made music in the first place. This decision was met with shockwaves. Gospel fans felt betrayed. Secular audiences were curious. Industry insiders whispered that he was risking his entire career. But for Molly, the choice was clear. Better to lose an industry than to lose himself. And here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Because instead of disappearing, Molly's departure opened doors he never imagined. The mainstream music world noticed him. Suddenly, he was being invited into spaces gospel artists rarely entered, collaborating with artists outside the church walls and reaching audiences who had never heard his name before. But this leap came with its own controversies. Some celebrated him as a pioneer, breaking barriers for gospel-rooted artists. Others accused him of selling out. And the question that lingered over his career for years was this: did Molly Music abandon gospel, or was he simply redefining it on his own terms? Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll uncover what happened when Molly stepped into the mainstream spotlight and how it forever changed his reputation in both the gospel world in the secular industry. When Mali Music stepped away from the gospel industry, many assumed his career would stall or even end. After all, gospel artists who try to cross over often face a